Thank you, Jessica. It's my pleasure to be here today. In the beginning here, since today is Workers' Memorial Day, I would like to take a moment of silence for those workers who have lost their lives on the job. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be here with you today to discuss the importance of preventing falls in the workplace. Thank you to the National Roofing Contractors Association for this presentation today and CPWR for our great partner for hosting this. The NRCA and CPWR both are important allies with OSHA in this campaign, and we are proud to be working with them both. Thanks, Tom, Shanahan, Harry Dietz, and Rich Trewin for your work on this event. I also want to thank each of you for the hard work you do every day in the construction industry trades. My hope is that you are safe and well, and that your families are well as well. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge your commitment to worker safety by being here today, and your role is an invaluable partner in this year's 8th annual National Stand Down to Prevent Falls in Construction upcoming next week. The stand down will be taking place next week, May 3rd through the 7th, and the goal remains the same, to raise awareness to fall hazards and reinforce proven safe work practices that help prevent fall fatalities and injuries. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, OSHA is encouraging employers to promote fall safety virtually like this event, or while employing social distancing practices among small groups. This webinar is focusing on the importance of harness fit. I can't tell you how many times as a compliance officer and an area director within OSHA, I've seen harness fit issues in the field over the last 30 years I've been in this safety industry. My hope is that you gain important insight into how to inspect and wear fall protection equipment properly. If this event is part of your fall stand down, great, awesome. This is an opportunity for employers to have a conversation with employees about job hazards, protective methods, and the company's safety policies, goals, and expectations. If you visit our website, you can get a certificate of participation for events like this for the fall stand down. The page goes live tomorrow. The support from our partners is key to a successful stand down. Partners like CPWR, NORA, NIOSH, and obviously the National Roofing Contractors Association, among many others. To be successful in this year's fall stand down event, we'll need your help once again. We're looking forward to you all participating next week in events. And remember, plan, provide, and train your way to successful interventions against falls in the workplace. And so if you do have an event next week and you want to share it, we're asking you through social media. A good way of sharing that is by hashtagging OSHA on Twitter at OSHA_DOL, and use the hashtag #StandDown4 safety. It's a good way to get your events spread through social media and to make a difference. Together, we can make a difference, preventing injuries and saving lives. Let's do all we can to send every worker home safe and healthy at the end of each and every day. Tom, did you want to introduce your team?
Uh-oh.
Oh, no. I can't hear you, Tom.
Harry, did you want to start off here?
Sure, we can hop right into it, as a matter of fact. If Tom is unable to get into it, I guess I'll introduce the gentleman on my side, and he can introduce me. That might work well. But this is Harry Dietz. He's the Director of Enterprise Risk Management for NRCA. And Harry has been with us, how many years now, Harry?
Almost 19.
19 years of being in the industry and helping our members out with safety concerns, risk management concerns, and definitely very fitting for today, full body harness fit the basics type of training. We've been doing this for quite some time and have a number of different programs that we work with, but we're really happy to be here today. Harry, I'll let you introduce me.
Thanks, Rich. This is the man next to me is Rich Trewin with NRCA, also one of the members of the risk management department. And Rich, you've been with NRCA for
6 years
now, doing this kind of thing. And before that, he's been in the roofing industry as safety director for a national roofing company. And he's joined us to help in this effort to bring safety to all of those in the roofing industry. And the person that you can see but you cannot hear, which we
can you hear me now?
happen more often, but there we go.
There we go.
Tom can.
All right.
Now we kind of like you quietly, Tom, but okay.
I know. So anyway, all I wanted to add here is Harry and Rich have done the heavy lifting here, and I'll be helping out with questions on the back end. And with that, Harry, why don't you take it off?
Thanks,
or whatever.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it, and thanks for everybody joining in, and for CPWR and OSHA to be a part of this as well. It's always great to do things with them. So the thing we're going to talk about today, full body harness fit. This is the basics, but these are really important basics, and we're talking about one component of the full body harness. And in the next slide, you'll see we have a definition there. If you can flip to the next slide. And we have the components of a personal fall arrest system. And so a personal fall arrest system, it's defined in subpart M. So I'm speaking of the construction regulations here. And it's basically a system used to arrest an employee in a fall from a working level. It consists of an anchorage, connectors, a body harness, and may include a lanyard, deceleration device, lifeline, or suitable combination of these. And Rich, you'll notice I skipped something there.
Yeah,
in that definition.
definitely. You took out body belt. As a matter of fact, back in 1998, we're no longer to use body belts for fall arrest or fall restraint, for that matter. So we took that out. Actually, fall arrest only. We took that out of there in 1998, and we're not going to really talk about that too much today. That's probably going to be all you're going to hear from us on that little issue there. So I like that you crossed it out here. That's good stuff.
Thanks. So the next slide, as we talk about the body harness component, you'll see we have some different pictures here, and all throughout this, we've gotten information from manufacturers that we've got from the websites. So we're not putting these pictures up in any kind of endorsement or anything, but we just want you to be aware there's different types of harnesses that can range from let's say the least expensive, the compliance in a can version, to some of the higher expensive models that have tool pouches and things like that, and even self components built into it. So there's a wide range of
Right. We've seen kits anywhere from and no, I'm not promoting anybody. The Home Depot specials, the kits in a can, where you can buy the entire kit, including a rope grab and a lanyard and the whole deal with a harness for $75, all the way up to a harness that ranges in the $500 range with all the comforts of home, with tool pouches and belts and all the bells and whistles on it. So these things can range in a wide variety of different ways, and it can range in comfort as well. So those are some of the things we'll have to look at when we talk about the fit and how to inspect a harness. When we talk about that, every harness is going to have its own individual inspection process due to the fact that they all do differ.
So on the next slide, we're kind of again we're starting at step one here as to what is going into the size of the harness. How is that harness being selected? And this is something that oftentimes the employer may get a bunch of harnesses. There may not be that much attention to the detail on the sizes. And if you look at this, we've just taken some different size charts from certain manufacturers, just randomly, really. But we want you to kind of look at them. I'll kind of just read some of them because I know it's kind of hard to see on the small screen. But the sizes kind of really are structured kind of unusually in that, like, say, a small version of a harness can fit somebody in some instances 6 feet tall and 160 pounds. And other small harnesses are for people, say, 5'8", up to, say, like 190 pounds in the one. Another small harness, it's also a 5'10" height requirement and 170 pounds. So on all the different manufacturers' size tables that an employer might use, they have to be kind of cautious with the different sizes that they're going to get, because that's going to all relate to how that harness is going to fit on that person's body, and we'll get into that in more detail. These you can see, I think, Rich, as we went through them, kind of related to more the male physique, right?
Right. And a pre-webinar question that came up was actually about, fitting for women specifically. And, the one thing about this, if we look at this, anywhere ranging from 6 foot tall for a small person to 190 pounds, that would be a relatively large woman. And not saying that that's a bad thing, but at the same time, we have to look at these sizing charts and we can't refer to them when we go to these women's types harnesses. And if Jessica, if you'll turn to the next slide, we want to talk about these women the manufacturers harnesses for a different gender, in the fact that they are different and they fit differently. And the fact of the matter is that more and more women are coming into the construction industry. More and more women are starting to use fall protection harnesses, wherever it may be. Now, again, we're not promoting any specific manufacturers, but these are just 3 that we happen to find on the internet. And we wanted to share these with you because there is a different fit to it. A couple things that you'll notice on these, and a couple things that we've looked up when talking about gender-specific harnesses, is the chest strap, it's the waist strap, it's the leg straps. They differ from those, and the sizes also differ as well. So if you are going out and purchasing just any given harness for a variety of employees, you're going to want to focus specifically gender-specific traits if you have female workers in your workforce. And these are 3 great manufacturers that do offer some different things. A lot more comfortable. They're specific to the waist, they're specific to the leg, and they're specific to that chest strap as well. So they make these specifically so that they are more comfortable to wear. Because what we have to remember is harnesses are worn throughout the day. They can be worn up to 8 hours, up to 10 hours, and even in some cases longer than that. So you want to make them as comfortable as possible. And if we're doing a one size fits most or one size fits all type of harness, it's not necessarily going to work for everybody. So we have to really delve into it a little bit deeper and try and find or select the proper type for the employee that we have.
Yeah, so it's going to take a little effort on the part of the employer who's going to look into the sizes, that safety director who might be in charge of that. But then it's going to get down to that worker who's going to wear that individual harness on a daily basis to get to the next part of this. So if we go to the next slide, this is where we get into some of the details of that worker is going to try to fit that harness so that it fits well. But before we even get there, that manufacturer in all their instructions that we've seen requires that person who uses it is going to inspect it. So that's the manufacturer telling you that. But another important element is that OSHA is telling you that too. So we've excerpt here from the construction regulations in 1926 502 D21 what OSHA says about it. So this is a requirement that the manufacturer is saying, but it's also part of a regulation. So this is something we're doing, and it's for good reason. There's a reason why the manufacturers tell you this, or there's a reason why it's in the regulation. So personal fall arrest systems shall be inspected prior to each use for wear, damage, and other deterioration, and defective components shall be removed from service. So this is kind of the broad requirement. But now we want to get into what that really means detail-wise. So as we go to the next slide in terms of inspection and what's it saying, what Rich and I have done here is we've gone to these manufacturers' instructions and we've taken out excerpts again from them to show you what some of them are saying. But the important thing is, Rich, as we go through these, we're talking about different manufacturers telling us different things. So there may not be a universal answer for each inspection as to how you're conducting it. So maybe let's go through some of these and see what exactly the manufacturers are telling us.
Yeah, that's right, Harry. And a number of questions that came in prior to the webinar again are going to be answered right here, because many of them ask, how long do my harness, how long is it, does it last? How do I do an inspection specifically for my harness? Well, in most of those cases, the manufacturers are going to have those specific instructions for performing an inspection on that harness right on their website. And typically it comes with paperwork. Most harnesses will come with paperwork. But those are the specific inspection instructions that you should be following anytime. We don't really have any guidance. And as Harry said, these bullet points that we have on the screen right here have been put together from a number of different manufacturers so that we can kind of give you an idea of what you should be looking for. So here, if you want to take number 1 there.
Yeah, so we found this in several of them, but it's telling the user you inspect it before each use, and that's kind of our baseline. That's our starting point. But then a lot of them say that the competent person has to inspect that harness at least annually. Now, from our point of view in terms of risk management at NRCA, we might say that, who's that competent person? And we might hope that every user of a harness is actually a competent person in terms of their knowledge and their authority. May not happen that way, but the manufacturer is telling you the user looks at it before each time he or she puts it on. Competent person then is inspecting it at least annually. But we have some changes to that,
Right.
as you can see in the next bullet.
Right, we have some other manufacturers that specifically stated that they want the competent person to inspect at intervals of no more than 6 months. So you can see that there's differences between manufacturers on what they're actually saying on how the inspection process should take place. It goes without saying. As we get into some of the slides a little bit later, you're going to see that other manufacturers actually have sign-offs specifically on the harness themselves where the inspector can check that off. Others are going to have paperwork that goes along with the harness, and yet others you might have to create paperwork to fill out forms to say that those harnesses have been inspected as well.
So as we go down this list, you can see there's a competent person 6-month inspection, maybe advanced if workplace conditions. We know, like, for example, in roofing, there's a lot of adhesives in use. There's asphalt that can maybe advance that, could maybe cause wear, but others are doing things like welding that can also have an impact on that. So that may advance that competent person inspection, and it's also going to do some things for the user. They're going to look for things related to the work that they're doing. But the last bullet is the one that often in our day-long fall protection class we get asked about is, how long is my harness good for? How long can I have it? And one manufacturer, we just copied this, the life of the harness is based on the inspection. So if that person who's using it inspects it and it's passed, if the competent person inspects it at whatever that time interval is, and it passes, it can remain in service. But the important thing is, Rich, this is one manufacturer saying this, and is that going to apply to every harness?
No, and as a matter of fact, back when I was a safety director for a national roofing company, we would purchase in bulk. So we would purchase a number of fall protection harnesses. We would purchase the kits in a can. And the basics behind that is they had an expiration date. That specific manufacturer said harnesses are good 3 years from the purchase date. Well, some of those cans never made it out within that 3 years of period of time. So they would sit on shelves, and when they finally were ready to be used, they were already expired. Well, in that situation, that manufacturer was willing to take back all those harnesses, re-inspect them, reissue them, or they gave us new kits in a can in that case. So it's something that you'll have to weigh out anytime you're purchasing a harness. You may want to look into it. What's required as far as the longevity of that harness? What is the lifetime of that harness? What is this manufacturer specifically expecting for that lifetime of the harness? And is it going to fit in with my plans for the use of that harness as well?
And then lastly, on this slide, we say the manufacturers have instructions regarding the labels. And usually in this inspection process, you're going to check those labels, check the serial number. This is going to be important also for inventory purposes and documenting this, because it's important to document this stuff. The old rule is if you don't have it documented, it never happened. And that's going to be the case with these inspections as well. The dates of the inspections, and you're going to check the labels for legibility. So if we go to the next slide, we'll kind of get into some of the specifics that are also related to the exact inspection issues that you're going to do as a user and as a competent person at the intervals. But say, for example, as we start on this, and we have a picture here, I think everybody can see it pretty well, but that's a harness that I forget where we got this, but I think we got it from a member who obviously it didn't pass inspection. You can see the cut there of about, 1/8 of an inch. But anytime you have a cut of that size in webbing, that's going to be an indicator that it's got to come out of service. But some of the other factors we have listed, what manufacturers have said here in general, that they want inspections done with their harnesses. So one of the first things is a weight capacity of 310 pounds. A lot of manufacturers mention this because this is also going to have going to deal with the issue of the impact forces that are going to be imposed on a body based on the weight and the distance of the fall. And so the personal fall arrest system is going to have a certain amount of force, impact force, that it's going to be able to handle. And so they mentioned the 310-pound weight limit. And it may be that you have to get a different harness if you have workers who may exceed that limit.
Right, and there are specific harnesses that are more heavy duty that can be made for that as well. So don't think that they aren't out there. There, as we said, before, there's a variety of harnesses out there. They've created them, they've made them to fit every scenario. So you just have to look a little bit.
Yeah, and then as we go down, if that harness, if an arrest force is imposed on that harness, that's a critical event. And so a lot of manufacturers will tell you that immediately comes out of service at that point. And that's also in addition to the case where the impact forces have been imposed on it. But say, for example, that harness doesn't have a fall arrest indicator on it, which we'll show you some pictures coming up of that. You still may, according to one manufacturer, that's still going to come out of service, even if that fall arrest indicator hasn't popped. It's got to be taken out of service. So it's something that users have to be aware of. That the good news is that harness has likely saved their life. Bad news is the harness is coming out of service.
Right, definitely. And Harry has a funny story that he tells quite a bit. We teach a day-long fall protection class. And one individual showed up to class and actually said that the harness that he had in that classroom had saved his life 3 times prior to that day. So, unfortunately, that's one of those rules that we sometimes forget and that some people don't understand.
Yeah.
That once a harness has been in a scenario where we've had a fall arrest situation, it should be taken out of the service immediately. And as Harry stated, some manufacturers even say that it should be destroyed. So, Jessica, if we can go to the next one.
So here again, some pictures again of webbing that has burn holes, and then on the belt buckle there, the belt strap rather, you can see the fraying. This was a Rich, I think you got this from a member who had taken it out of service as
Correct.
well.
And what had occurred in this, and here's one of the things you'll have to look at, is that a small snag at one point, catching on a piece of metal on a rooftop or putting your knife away, creating a small little snag like this can turn into a big issue later on. And that's exactly what happened. Initially, this cut here, this fray on the right-hand belt buckle or the leg strap loop was just a small little fray. And what happened over time is it grew into a bigger fray. And at the point which it's at right now, they took all these out of service. So these things are things that can create, they may seem small in the beginning, but can get bigger and can affect the use and fit of that harness. In this situation, it was definitely something that needed to be taken out of service.
And this one's pretty obvious in terms of the fraying. In some instances, you notice we have a note there that some manufacturers use a webbing that has red fibers in it, kind of telltale fibers. And I think many of you maybe have seen this with slings, with material handling slings used in rigging loads, that oftentimes that sling, as it gets damaged, red fibers will pop from it. The old saying was, if you see red, you're dead. That's kind of an indication that that sling has to be taken out of service because there's been some type of load imposed on it. And it's the same thing with this one manufacturer who does that with the harness webbing, because sometimes it's a little hard to tell on the frays. But if we go to the next slide, we'll kind of get, some more visuals of things that are pretty clear.
Right, and I think what I'll do is I'll take it from left to right. So we'll start with the image on the left, and that is some of the D-ring in the back. 2 things to note here is, number one, there is corrosion, there is oxidation on the D-ring itself, to a point where this wasn't necessarily a functioning D-ring, in the sense that what it was starting to do is, you can see it started to fray the attachment to that harness itself, and it was creating some issues where there was a rough edge on that, and it created a cut in that harness itself. If we go down to the lower image in the middle, you can see that's an indicator on that harness itself that started to pull away and stretch. And when that starts to happen, immediately it needs to be taken out of service. Up top in the center, more corrosion on one of the buckles. this is very common in our industry, is just to take your harness off at the end of the day and throw it up in a bucket. Hopefully you're putting the lid on the bucket, but what happens in many cases is that lid blows off, it gets lost on the job. And in many of these cases, what I've seen in the past is buckets or harnesses that were left up on the roof to the weather extremes. And that was water, that was wind, that was rain, that was snow. And this is what happens with that. And in this situation, this bucket was not only corroded, but it also had tar and asphalt on it. And that was one of the things that we decided that it was time to take that out of service. On the lower right-hand corner, this harness actually looked like it was in very good shape upon visual inspection. There was some staining on it. There was some white staining on it that looked a little different. As I started to get a little bit deeper into it and started to touch that on the harness itself, I was actually able to take my thumbnail and scrape away the fibers of the harness. So in this situation, what we determined was that there must have been some type of a chemical spill or a chemical splash on that harness. And at that point, it degraded that harness enough that in a fall scenario, that harness may have failed. So we took this out of service as well. But it was something that visually, upon initial inspection, just looking at it, I couldn't really see it. I couldn't tell that this harness was damaged. But once I started to physically examine the harness, touch it, and rub it, it actually started to fall apart. And so that's the things that we have to look at. Some of these things are hidden. Some of these things we may not be able to see as visually as corrosion, as stitching coming out. And it's where we have to take a deeper delve or a deeper dive into doing the inspection process. Jessica, if you can go to the next slide.
And so on this slide, what we've done is we talked a little bit about impact indicators, and there's kind of several different ways that that's done by manufacturers. Some kind of more obvious than others. The second picture from the left, as you can see, that's just a close-up of the stitching, and you can see most manufacturers do this. There's a geometric pattern in that is pretty clear, and that's going to tell you if there's likely been some impact loading on that harness, because that stitching is not going to have that nice geometric look. Those are going to pop loose if there's been some loading. But Rich, on the other three, it's kind of a little different situation than this with just the stitching. There's a little more going on.
Right. Right. And in the far left, as you can see the arrow, that's a plastic indicator on the D-ring. And not all manufacturers make their indicators in the same way. So you have to know your specific harness, your specific manufacturer's fall indicators that are on it. In some cases, as you can see on the far left, it's a plastic indicator that when exposed to a fall, these little tabs on the outside of that plastic D-ring will actually break apart. That's to show that there was an indication that there was a fall. On some of the others, the stitching will actually unfold and elongate, and in many cases will show a different color. In some of those harnesses, there'll be a bright color, that's going to be under there. There's not going to be confetti shooting out everywhere when it happens, but these are the indicators that are shown. If you see elongation, if you see stitching that's been removed, or if you see a plastic piece that's broken or cracked, that's all a showing some idea that there has been a fall scenario, there has been a fall arrest, or that there has been some type of impact put on that harness, and that's an indicator that that harness should be taken out of service.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a subtle thing, because if you notice on the picture on the right, it's just a webbing that's overlapped and stitched onto itself. Right. So if you're a user, you're using that harness every day, you know that area has basically triple webbing on there because it's got the overlay. And so you'll know that if there's been a fall on it, if that's totally stretched out and it's basically one piece of webbing, that's not stitched onto itself, you've had some impact load on that.
Right.
So if we can go to the next slide. What we've got here is a video of how to conduct an inspection, and hopefully it'll be useful just as a technique. There's a lot of different things you can do, but we have something here that hopefully is helpful.
Here's some quick tips for full body harness inspections. First, let's look at hardware. This includes D-rings, buckles, keepers, and back pads. Inspect for damage, distortion, sharp edges, burrs, cracks, and corrosion. Secondly, let's check webbing. Inspect for cuts, burns, tears, abrasions, frays, excessive soiling, and discoloration. Third, we'll check the stitching. Inspect for pulled or cut stitches. And lastly, let's check the labels. Inspect and make certain all labels are securely held in place and legible. Once complete, record the inspection date and results in your inspection log.
So that's, a lot of manufacturers, in terms of like looking at the webbing, they'll tell you to do different things. They might say to kind of bend that webbing over kind of into like a U-shape position, so that might give you a little indication of what the wear is on the webbing internally. But as Rich was talking about with the one that we think was exposed to some kind of chemical or maybe an acid, some of it you have to poke at it a little to see what's going on with that like powdery substance or whatever is on there. So it's got to be something that's maybe a little more than visual, that you're kind of moving that webbing around, moving those buckles around, making sure those buckles function. So there's a little more involved. So if we go to the next slide, we want to talk about the fit. So in other words, you've got the harness. It's the right size for you. You've inspected it, put it on, and so now the issue is, what's it supposed to fit like? Because I don't know if any of you are like me. When I got my first harness, I took it out of the bag and I was like, oh my God, what do I do with this thing? And usually they say, well, you hold it by the D-ring and shake it loose and everything, kind of will flow and it'll be pretty obvious. Well, maybe an hour later after I got the thing on, I kind of, knew where things went. But the manufacturers, if you look at these bullets on the left, we don't have a lot of stuff that we can say definitively, this is what you've got to do. Because like on one, the manufacturer says the harness must be close fitting. But others might say it should be snug. And this is what we saw the most, I think, as we looked through this, was it should be snug, but allow a full range of motion. Well, a full range of motion might be different for me than it is for Rich or for Tom or for Scott or Jessica. It's going to be different, I think, individually, what that means to you. How much room do you need in that full range of motion? So one of the others, though, Rich, in this first picture tells you to do what?
The 2-finger test, for snugness, taking your 2 fingers and sticking them in between the harness and your leg. Yet another said a full hand, take it in and put it sideways and slap it on your leg, just to make that. So the manufacturers have their own set specifics. There's nothing that really says this is exactly how you need to do it. So what you need to do, again, is find what your manufacturer specifically says and follow those for your proper fit. Notice a couple other things in here. We'll have a couple slides that come up, a couple more images. Notice your chest strap should not be too close to the user's neck. Chest strap should be centered in the chest, 6 inches down from the shoulders. D-ring between the shoulder blades. We have some pictures here where, the chest strap is definitely too high on that, on that middle picture. And if you were in a fall arrest scenario, as you'll see in the next slide, you'll see that chest strap actually comes up and could choke the individual or snap the individual's neck, God forbid. And of course, the D-ring, being too low can create other issues. So if you're looking at proper fit for your harness, this is what it should somewhat look like. You can see the snugness around the legs. You can see this chest strap is straight across the chest, down below the neck, so we're not creating that problem if we were to have a fall arrest. And then the D-ring is centered between the shoulder blades on the back. So this is what your ideal fit, once you're wearing that harness, should look like. But of course, you're not going to be able to see your back. So what we always recommend is trying to work with somebody else on the rooftop. Have somewhat of a buddy system, making sure that another individual is checking it out, making sure that it's fitting properly, the D-ring is fit properly, and that your harness looks like it's set up properly, and even to the point where that other person is ensuring that you're hooked up properly as well. Let's remember, we are working throughout the year, so there's going to be different factors that are involved with that, including clothing. Right here in this image, I have a pair of jeans on and a t-shirt. What about during the middle of winter? I'm going to have a heavier jacket on. I may have a snowsuit on of sorts. And in that case, I may have to readjust my harness and refit it. But it should always have somewhat a similar look to this, where it's snug around the legs, the chest strap is centered across the chest, and the D-ring is centered across the back.
So on the next slide, as we go to that, we see the significance of this, you know. So we know after talking to folks that a lot of workers say, well, you know, I want it to be comfortable, and we understand that. But the significance of it, the D-ring placement, is that as we, you know, you see Rich here, we've got a confined space tripod, and this is what we did after that picture before that showed his D-ring down more, you know, by his belt line. And this is the important thing is, if the confined space tripod is supposed to kind of just give a demonstration of what you would be like in a fall situation. So he's basically on the tripod, but it basically is showing that he would be hanging by his rope grab or hanging by his SRL, whatever. And you can see he's in this kind of like Superman position where his head isn't directly above his feet. And that's a bad thing for what he can do from a self-rescue point of view. And we've seen this an awful lot as we've done our fall protection class at different locations. Workers don't have their harness fit properly so that D-ring is between their shoulder blades. And what happens is they go into this orientation, and that's the problem that occurs when you try to do self-rescue. Some of the things you can do really require you to be more vertical. You can't be tipping down this way into like a 45-degree angle because it makes things more difficult, even for the use of suspension trauma straps, which are like the easiest thing to do.
Right.
So that's why it's kind of critical.
And not to mention the fact of the impact of the fall itself, rather than being placed on the hips and on the legs, it's now going to be forced on your head and your neck area and your shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so that impact of the fall is going to differ as well, putting more stress in those areas instead of on your legs and on your waist. So it can be a real bad thing. And like Harry said, we've seen this a lot at our seminars. We ask everybody to bring in their harness, and we'll get them up on this tripod and actually lift them. And a lot of times we'll see this exact scenario, and those individuals are unable to perform the self-rescue techniques that we teach.
So if we go to the next slide, this kind of shows this a little more. Rich was not injured during this process. He looks like he's in pain, but he was okay. But the picture on the left, that was, we suspended him after that chest strap we knew was basically too close to his neck. It wasn't below his, like say 6 inches below, like some manufacturers recommend, or more kind of like at the armpits. And so then as that harness traveled up his body from the load of his body being on the harness, that's what happened. The chest strap goes up to his neck. And so this is an issue. Now he can correct this because he's conscious, but not every fall is going to result in a worker who is conscious. And so that gets kind of deadly now because that chest strap could impede airflow, could impede breathing. And then the second photo, you can see Rich had that harness way too loose, and you can see what's happened. It's the D-ring has traveled up well over his head, which in this particular harness, Rich, was not a problem because it has a delta pad in the back and would have been hard to duck out of. But in other harnesses, we got an issue with that.
Yep, you can actually fall right out of the harness or actually come forward, and now you're set by your legs alone. And this can be a real bad issue if you set up your harness that way. And then yet again, if we look in that scenario on the far right, we'll show a quick video of what can happen if you wear your leg bands too loose. And this is a scenario that's near and dear to my heart because I actually had an individual that had this happen. This is how they wore their harness because they were always bending over. It was a residential roofing team that I had out. And one of the individuals wore his leg straps this way because he was always going down and getting bundles. And he felt that, well, this is comfortable and I'm going to be bending over. It's the best fit for me. Well, what ended up happening is he got up onto the rooftop, slid down, and you'll see exactly what happens if, Jessica, you can play that video there. So as you can see, what's happening there is that those straps actually slide up your legs. The individual that I was speaking about actually had this event occur, and when it occurred, he actually received such severe bruising on his legs that he had to be on workman's compensation for over a month on blood thinners because the bruising was so severe. They were afraid that this individual was going to get blood clots in his legs. So wearing that properly, I mean, you can only imagine falling, 6 feet off a roof or 8 feet off a roof, and the impact of that. Now add that to that stretch with that lanyard riding up your legs, or that strap riding up your leg. It created severe enough bruising that he was out, on blood thinners, out on work comp, and wasn't able to return to work for fear of having one of those blood clots create even more of a hazard. And Jessica, if you want to go to the next slide.
So that, as you can see, as opposed to the previous picture of Rich having that D-ring about a foot over his head, he's got his weight on it. We didn't suspend him that far. He's got his weight on this, but you can see his D-ring only rose up just a little bit, which is really ideal. And what's more important is that Rich, you can see, is vertical. Okay, so that's a good thing for self-rescue. That he can, and even for assisted rescue, that's important. But for self-rescue, even more so, because you can only do so much physically to perform a self-rescue. You really have to be in that vertical position. And you can see on the second picture, that's basically how we would like to see it, is with the leg strap snug, the chest strap at the right level and snug as well.
Right.
So yeah, and this, I think, Rich, if you want to.
Yeah, and this is one of those things too, we get asked a lot about with self-rescue, is how to do it. In all the scenarios, as Harry said, we want to try and be as vertical as possible. It's just going to aid in the ability to perform self-rescue. But a lot of questions that come in are, what about trauma straps? How do we use them? Where should we place them? One of the biggest things about these is they sell these, aftermarket kits, drop down trauma straps, and a lot of people ask, where do I put them? Well, there's a lot of other things that can impede, the use of your harness and can impede the effect of your harness. It includes tool pouches, but one of the things we have to do is make sure that it can't impede the fit or function of that harness. So with these, what we're going to try and do is follow, again, manufacturer's instructions. They're going to deliberately tell you exactly where to do it. Now, many of the newer harnesses come out with trauma straps connected right to them. They're drop-down straps or straps that are right in the harness itself. But there are also these aftermarket ones. And what I would always recommend is trying to find that hip or waist belt line to put these on so that they're easy to use. If we were to have a fall, we can easily reach them to drop them down. But then secondly, we're trying to put a lot of that pressure that is now on that groin area. Rather than being on the groin area, we're going to put it on the hips, which is going to allow us, our femoral artery, to still flow and allow that blood flow to be more constant. So these trauma straps are relatively easy to use. It's something that we teach in our day-long fall protection class. I also believe that we'll be doing a webinar during the stand down that's going to talk specifically about rescue techniques, and we'll teach you a little bit more about that in this. But for the most part, we want to make sure if we're buying these aftermarkets, they don't impede the fit or function of the harness itself. And in most cases, manufacturers like this one, DBI Sala, will tell you exactly where to install those on any given harness. With that, I think, Jessica, we're ready to take some questions. I know we have a couple. Tom, if you're still on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Good. So hey, well, great job, you guys. Very informative. I didn't know if maybe just if you could back up, I think two slides of that last one of Rich hanging with the properly. I just wanted to point one thing out and just, can you go back just to, there we go, right to that one there. On the left-hand side there, Harry, you mentioned it, but I just wanted to underscore the difference between that picture and the previous one where it was loose and how far up that D-ring was, way above Rich's head, but properly, look at, you can just see it, there's like a little crown on his head. If you go back, just go back. Yeah, just stay on this side for a second. So that left picture there, you can just see it's like a little crown on his head there. That's the D-ring, and that's when it's done properly. So you remember how it was on his back. It was in the middle of his back, but once it's elongated like that, that's where it goes properly. So that allows Rich to be vertical to do that self-rescue technique. So that is a real good test to show you how much that even when it's done properly, that harness moves.
Right, right.
So thanks, you guys. That was terrific. Great pictures and slides and everything here to show all this. So one of the questions that we got, obviously not everything is necessarily in the construction workplace, but they asked the question, what are some key differences or things we should consider when fitting workers with a harness for warehouse work versus how they are normally fitted for construction, if there are any differences at all? Any thoughts on that?
Sure, that's a really good question. And in reality, the order pickers or the PITs that we have in warehouses generally have an ideal situation from a standpoint of having an anchor, because it's directly above us. So really the harness fit and the harness selection for those is determined on, again, the employee's comfort level, the employer's decision on what type of harness to buy. But as long as we buy a standard type of harness used for fall arrest, because remember, if you're going to fall off a order picker or a PIT, you're going to be in an arrest scenario. So what we want to do is buy one that's specifically made for that, with a D-ring centered on the back, proper fit with the chest strap, and a comfortable fit for working in that scenario. Because with those order pickers and with those PITs, we're going to be doing quite a bit of physical activity, grabbing boxes or materials off of shelvings. So you want to have something that's going to be comfortable for that person, but yet it's going to be the same as we discussed in this webinar. It's going to be based on what the employee's preference is and what the employer's preference is in buying that harness for those employees.
Yeah, and it might be that depending on what the worker is doing, whether construction or general industry, if there's going to be confined space work, you may want to consider retrieval D-rings that oftentimes are at the shoulder level, or it might be a front D-ring. There may be other instances, and it's going to be something that your company has to really analyze as to what are the exposures that worker could confront, and make sure that if there's a retrieval situation from a confined space, that the equipment is aligned with those exposures.
Right, right.
Great. Well, thanks for very much. One of the questions we had from online here is not sure any recommendations for tags attached to harnesses to indicate a harness was inspected. What he's looking for is like color coding for quarterly competent person inspection, for example.
You know, I don't know of too many out there on the marketplace, but it's something that you can do as a company, is develop a procedure. You know, I go back to the grounding assurance program, you know, using the different colored tapes on electrical cords. It's something that could easily be done by this means. You know, in the grounding assurance program that we had at our company, we did it color coded by the seasons. So white was going to be the winter time, you had snow. Green was going to be springtime, you had things greening up. Red was going to be summer, you know, it was hot out. And orange was going to be the fall, the changing of the leaves. Now that was a quarterly type of inspection. And as we stated, you can do that. You can go to a 6-month, you can go to an annual. In those scenarios, you could create some type of color coding tag that attaches somewhere on the harness. Again, that can't impede the fit or function of that harness. So there may be products out there, you know, as we search the internet, we find these things all the time. You know, you can look up the keyword, you know, fall protection harness tagging or tags. I'd give that a try if you want to. But other than that, developing your own program or developing your own procedures within your company, again, if it doesn't impede the fit or function of that, would probably be the way I would go.
And most manufacturers will also have like a form that I don't know, you could see that, I think, in the video, but there's also examples, I forget where those were from, but a lot of manufacturers have them, and they're specific as to a checkbox for the webbing and everything, and the buckles and every component, the D-ring. So check with your manufacturer, because every website you can download those. And again, it's a great way to document it, especially those competent person reviews of the harness that you want to be sure that you have documented. And then the everyday use inspections, that's something that as a training component, you're going to train those individuals who are wearing those harnesses that this is something that's part of their daily regimen. As they go out, they're going to put their harness on, they're going to look it over.
Right.
Great, thank you. So a question we had, and we've talked about this ourselves, can you talk about when the D-ring in front is used.
Kind of.
Yeah, it's, I mean, where we're, you know, in the OSHA rules, it says in fall arrest that D-ring has to be in the center of the user's back. But we've seen it in roofing that on occasion where workers who are usually working on a severely pitched roof, you know, so usually like 10 and 12 and greater, that they may want to use that front D-ring as like a positioning D-ring to hold them on that pitch. If they're not, you know, usually they'll also have slide guards as for foot stability. But a lot of them will want to use that in kind of a rock climbing configuration. And I think the consensus is that that would be an OSHA violation because their fall arrest system is supposed to be connected to the back D-ring. So I understand the conflict there because you want to be supported in the work position you're in. And I don't know if there's a good solution to that you know, would comply with OSHA and still allow the worker to be at least stabilized in a work position other than using slide guards for the footing.
Right, and I think one of the things about that too, Tom, is that, you know, the D-ring in the center of the back is the main one for fall arrest, as OSHA says. All other D-rings, those that are on your hips, those that are on your chest, are more there for positioning devices, so that you can stay in one specific area or you can work in one specific area, being held in, not being allowed to be in a fall scenario. You know, and those are the things. I know we get a lot of questions about that. You know, I have this D-ring on my chest. Can I use it? I have these D-rings on my hips. Can I use them? And in most of these scenarios, the answer is going to be no for a fall arrest scenario, but it may be something that those D-rings are there for a purpose. They may be for positioning devices. And that's, again, something that every employer is going to have to weigh out. How are my harnesses going to be used? And can I teach my employees how to use them properly, especially if they have these extra D-rings on them? And is that D-ring there because I want it there because I know what type of work they're doing, and I'm going to teach them how to use them properly. Remember, as Harry said, that D-ring in the center of your back is there for the fall arrest, as OSHA said.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's something that, you know, we talked initially about the body belt in fall arrest scenarios. And the reason we talk about that is the forces that are put on the body and in fall arrest. And if you've seen some, there's usually video out there from manufacturers of a dummy being dropped in a body belt and what it does to the body. But think about it in terms of somebody in fall arrest who's connected at their hips and falling attached at the front, what that would do to the body. It's generally not meant to bend in that direction when there's fall impact forces put on it. So that's why we're concerned about that, why we would be very cautious with anybody using it in an improper configuration.
We've gotten several questions, you guys, about how fit differs for women. And you talked about it, obviously, in the beginning, and maybe you could just kind of highlight some of your thoughts again about how they differ.
Right. No, and it's a great question. I think Jessica had shared some links too for some of those. But one of the main things that we saw on the harnesses was a different fit, more of a horizontal fit around the leg straps, rather than coming up onto the hips. So there was more of a side strap that came down, which allowed the leg straps to be more horizontal rather than angled, like we see in some of the pictures of me wearing the harness. Also, I believe it was almost all of the women's harnesses that we noted had a different waist belt or a waistline that was made specifically to fit women. And what that did is that allowed for that leg strap to also sit horizontally along with the waist strap. So most of them had a waist belt and a leg strap that both fit horizontally. They also had some mention of the cross your heart bras that were out years ago. They made harnesses specifically like that were more cross your heart type of harnesses that fit a little differently, but had the same function as any other fall protection harness out on the market. And again, it's something that you're going to have to look to individual manufacturers to determine which one fits you the best. But they are out there, and they do fit specifically for women, or they are made to fit specifically for women.
And Jessica just notes, and if you go to the chat box, CPWR has some resources. You know, CPWR is a endless plug here, but has some great information. And obviously they have stuff on this too. So people have done the research, designers who have worked on this, and CPWR has some information on their website that it would be good to go to for more details on that, because it's important that you know, the women in construction or in any industry are fitted properly for this, because again, in a fall situation, it's a big deal to have that harness fitting properly. And so I'd advise you to go to that website, and the links there.
Okay, I'm just going to have one more question here because we're approaching the hour, and I put myself on line here just because I think I'll answer it for you, because it's asking, what are some good methods to hold workers accountable for inspecting their fall protection equipment, specifically harnesses, and how can I better ensure that they're actually doing it? So the obvious quick answer always is checklist, right? I mean, so every day you give somebody a checklist, but we all know how checklists go after a while. You know, people just hate them, and they start just checking the boxes just to get the checklist done. You know, so then we all of a sudden have a checklist for the checklist. So to avoid that, although there is a place for checklists, that's for sure, doing things where you can do it as a team. So in the morning, if you have a number of people together, is a great way of having everybody do it all at once. Yeah. And that way, as a foreman or whatever, you can help inspect and show them what to be doing. But we also know, like, for example, a lot of us have service crews where only 1 or 2 people are going out. And how would you possibly do that? Well, again, the idea of getting and helping someone to understand how this is going to help them by showing them some of those videos we talked about, and the actual, like Rich looking like Superman, and how that would launch them. So we found that getting workers more involved in the consequences of not doing these things properly has really helped get them to care more about wanting to do it properly. So it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think there's a place for checklists, but that's not a place to rely completely. It's a both and, where we also really do our job to encourage workers, help them to understand how and why these things are so important. Yeah. And with that, I'll thank these guys. You did a great job, both of you, and back to Jess.
Yeah, thank you all for a great webinar. And I think we actually had it slated for a half hour, and we went an hour. There was so much great information. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining. I saw, a lot of questions coming in. We'll do our best to pull together any additional resources and share those when I send a follow-up email with the recording and a PDF of the slides. But a really invaluable topic and webinar. Thank you so much, Tom, Rich, and Harry, for giving your time. And Scott Ketcham had to go on to another meeting, but we thank him for being with us. And just a reminder to everyone to participate in the fall stand down next week. Anything and everything you might need to do so is at stopconstructionfalls.com. Thank you.
And also, NRCA will be hosting 3 webinars next week with OSHA. All on fall protection related things to support the stand down. So would love to see you there.
And they're free.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, you guys.
Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jess.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.